member of the Jackson County, Michigan Historical Society, Tony Shaughnessy. Hi, Tony.
Thanks, Bart. Great to be here.
Yeah, good to see you again. I think a lot of our viewers know Tony from, your many years in education, and I believe you were the last principal ever at Jackson Catholic Middle School.
I was. In 2014-15, they moved the middle school students out to Lumen Christi and combined for a 7th to 12th school out there. And I went with as an assistant principal at Lumen Christi until I retired in 2018.
Well, now you're lending your talents to the Jackson County, Michigan Historical Society and also your parish. The Shaughnessy name is one of those Jackson names that it's part of our history. You're a native.
I am. And that's why I'm so excited about this unveiling of the markers at the railroad depot this weekend, because the Shaughnessy men were railroad men. Two of my dad's uncles retired from the railroad, and I'm relatively certain that that's how the Shaughnessy's came to Jackson,
really?
Was by way of the railroad. And on both sides of the family, because my mother's father was a teacher in one-room schoolhouses in Paulding County, Ohio. And he was married and had a child and another one on the way, and school teaching wasn't just going to make it. So he got on the train in Paulding and took the train from Paulding to Jackson, probably to this depot, and got a job working in the factories here in Jackson and raised his family here.
Well, our depot, it's an icon of the community, and it's got some pretty major significance for our community, but also for the United States.
Yes, it's on the Register of Historic Places for the United States. And the unveiling this Saturday, there's two things. There's going to be a state historic marker put outside the depot, one of those tall green iron state historic markers. And then inside, the Jackson County, Michigan Historical Society has 5 markers they're going to unveil that list particular significant things that occurred in and around that property in its lifetime. So this depot here was built in 1873, I believe. And originally, that site was a site of a freight depot, and the passenger depot was about a block and a half away on Columbus and Michigan Avenue. So,
and it is the oldest continually operating passenger depot in the United States.
Correct. So it does have that significance also.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is in decent shape. I know they've done some improvements, the roof and so on throughout the years, but it could use some more.
As with all things, it needs a little TLC.
Yeah.
They did a major renovation probably 40 years ago, and they did a beautiful restoration of all the woodwork in the ticket office and stuff on the interior of the depot. And at one point, I think I read that there were 60 passenger trains a day that ended up in that Jackson Railroad Depot, because there were other trunk lines coming from the north and the south that also fed into that railroad station there. And it was the main line between Detroit and Chicago. And so, evidenced by, if you go to Elm and Page Avenue, the old railroad yards is where they serviced all the trains that ran on those lines between Detroit and Chicago. So that's why a lot of the Jackson people were employed by the railroad. They worked out there.
Yeah, the railroading, a very important part of our history and responsible for the population boom in the early 20th century.
Well, here in the Midwest, if you had the railroad and a river, you had a pretty good thing going, and Jackson had both. And so the other thing that they wanted to point out too is the significance of the railroad in the Underground Railroad movement. I mean, when you think Underground Railroad, you think of overland and stuff, but many times they were transported, sometimes on freight trains and sometimes, and Jackson was a hub when they made it this far north, then they could go east or west. And so it was pretty important in that movement too.
And that's really why Jackson is significant in Underground Railroad history, because of our above ground railroad.
Yes. And you know, the sadness is there's an entire generation of people that when they think of travel, they think of the interstate and airports, because the interstate highway system was developed after World War II. But for over 100 years before that, the major mode of transportation to and from anywhere here in the United States was by rail. And freight, my other great-grandfather was a teamster when they had horse and buggy type things. So he was moving freight, and the freight he was moving was probably coming to and coming from this railroad area. So,
yeah, Jackson's population, and really because of the railroads in the 1930s and 40s, just the city, more than 70,000 people.
oh yeah, just inside the city limits. Yeah, yeah.
Amazing. All right, you mentioned there's significant historical occurrences that have happened over the years at the train station. I can think of one just off the top of my head when President John F. Kennedy came here.
Yep.
It was on the train.
It was on the train, and the train stopped just west of the train station, and he gave a small speech out of the back of a train car that was on the back there. And then it moved on probably to Battle Creek and then Kalamazoo and across the Midwest. But he made these, they used to call them whistle stops. They'd stop for 5-10 minutes, make a speech, have a crowd there that knew it was coming, and then move on.
Yeah, and the crowd, it was all on foot surrounding the train. There must have been, people have estimated 40,000 people.
It's a good possibility. I can't imagine all those people crowded around, because that's the other thing too. Downtown Jackson has reconfigured itself so much in my lifetime. I mean, Cooper Street used to dead end at Michigan Avenue, and the area where Kennedy's train stopped would have been somewhere at one of those cross streets, either Columbus Street or Cooper Street, where he stopped to give that speech.
Now, besides Kennedy's visit, what are some of the other things that are of note in that location?
Well, like I said, it was a key point in the Underground Railroad. Can I get my notes?
Sure. Yeah. I think there have been other presidents that have
There have been other
visited.
presidents that
Yeah.
used the rail to get through, and then the founder of the Salvation Army stopped here in 1886. They had him shown at the railroad station, and then he stopped here in Jackson. So there's been several notable people that have taken the trains to and from Jackson at the time.
Yeah, and when he was here in Jackson, he started the Salvation Army in Jackson.
He did.
So I
And-
think Jackson's Salvation Army it's oldest in Michigan, but it might be the oldest in the country. I know it's up there among all the
It was one of
oldest.
the first, yep.
Yeah.
He came here and stopped in Jackson. Like I said, the railroad made Jackson quite a big community in its day. And it was a boom town. It really was a boom town.
We had a lot of restaurants and hotels and rooming houses all around that train station.
Correct. And there was a restaurant in the actual depot building. The area where the restaurant's located is closed off now. There's a Leland Beeman mural in an archway, and the other side of that archway was a restaurant, and it was pretty sizable in its day. And then the building also housed offices for the rail and that sort of thing.
So we are getting a historical marker, and I was surprised that, what? We don't have an historical marker there already? But we will this weekend.
Yeah, Linda Haas had done a lot of research and gotten everything put together to put the state historical marker there, as well as the markers that our society is putting on. And the state historical markers are great because they mark a site, but they're those big green outside on iron. The difference between the ones that we're putting up with the Jackson County, Michigan Historical Society is that they also have images and things with them, and they're being placed a lot of the times at places that no longer exist. So they just placed one out at the cemetery at the County Poor Farm. And people come into Jackson and say, County Farm Road, why is this called County Farm Road? Well, there used to be a county farm. And now the only thing that's left of the actual county farm are the concrete pillars that marked where the entrances and the corners of the property were, and the cemetery. And the cemetery doesn't have markers for the most part. It's just where they buried the people that were residents at the Poor Farm. So there's a marker out there that shows the actual building that stood there. There was an 1880s type huge Romanesque structure out there that was massive, and it burned down in 1967, I think. So there's been nothing to reminisce that. So these markers have pictures, and they're placed in areas where historical events have happened here in Jackson County that not necessarily are still notable. Like the train station is still physically here.
Well, I think it's great that the society is keeping our history alive. And we were talking before the show, there are a lot of young people that have no idea about the significance of some of these sites and of this train depot. You drive by it every day and you don't think twice about it.
One of the major missions of the Historical Society is kind of an educational type thing, and our hope is once we get all of these markers in place that you could do like a traveling tour of Jackson County and go to all these different sites where these markers are placed and get the history of what was.
Yeah, and we have Linda Haas and the Historical Society to thank for some of these official state historical markers.
Yes.
I know at Bucky Harris Park and at Mount Evergreen Cemetery, those markers specific to the Underground Railroad history, as a result of Linda Haas's research.
And Linda probably would be here today, but today's the day that they're actually setting all these markers in place at the depot, and so I'm coming in her stead. She would be a much better person for the historical side than I am.
So the marker's going in what is called LeGrand Square, and I'd never heard that, the little tiny park in front of the railroad station. I didn't even know it had a name. Do you know anything about the name?
I didn't know it had a name until I saw it referenced on one of the old city plats, and actually the railroad tracks come in on an angle to where Michigan Avenue was running east and west, and so that little triangle of property in front of the railroad station was always fenced off and had some plantings and trees there, and it was called LeGrand Square. And it would have made for off the main street an entrance, because there used to be a porch there, and if you're thinking of the entrance, the main entrance to the railroad depot off Michigan Avenue, then that grassy area would have made a nice, there wouldn't have been something blocking the actual train station at the time.
Yeah, so the porch that's over on the railroad, on the track side,
Right.
there was a similar porch on the...
There was a matching one, and if you look at the building closely, you can see where the corbel work on the top finishes, and then there isn't any, and you can see where the roof to the porch on that side of the building would have been.
Who actually owns the depot?
I believe it's owned by Amtrak now.
Okay. The society is funding, you are providing the funding, but it's through, I think you have some sponsorships and grants?
We do. It was actually grants from the Field Foundation that paid for the markers that are going inside the depot. And so it says here, the markers represent a collaboration between Jackson County, Michigan Historical Society and the entity that conducted the research, designed the markers and applied for the grant, and the Field Foundation, also known the Natalie Field Foundation, which was created to carry out the Field family's interest involving young people in their community through volunteerism to encourage the study and interpretation of life in Jackson County during the 20th century. And so the Field Foundation contributed to these markers.
Very nice. Now your family, with your interest in history and finding out that your family was a railroad family, your family had businesses in Jackson too, right?
At one time, yes. My dad's uncles ran a coal yard on Liberty Street, which was right along the railroad tracks there. And originally the coal yard was the Brotherhood of Railway Workers Cooperative. And at one point, somehow my uncles were stockholders or whatever and ended up actually running the company, and they renamed it Liberty Coal. But yeah, when coal was being sold on a regular basis here in town, because so many of the houses heated with it.
Yeah, we have a coal chute here in this building.
Yeah.
So the society, fairly new, Jackson County, Michigan Historical Society, just a few years old, but you guys have accomplished quite a lot.
Yeah, Maurice Imhoff was one of the driving forces and the founders of the society, and I don't know if you know Maurice, but he's a go-getter.
We know Maurice.
He has done a lot for the community in a very short time. I think it was formed in 2020, so it's like on its third year, and we've got 9 markers placed in the county already, and the board researches the information for the markers. So the reason I'm on the board is Jerry Glazer is a board member, and he was at Queen's Church as choir director for years, and I worked with him, and he knew I loved history, and so they were looking to build up the board a little bit more, and he called and asked if I'd be interested, and so I was invited to be a board member.
And I know that you are encouraging members to join. You have regular meetings, but I think you do some activities as well.
There's about 4 activities a year. We just had Dan Weimer do a presentation at the Jackson Public Library about some of the history of Jackson County prehistory, Native American type things. And we had over 60 people in the library auditorium down there, and he did a phenomenal job with the presentation. So there's like 2 or 3 presentations a year that the society does, and then we have a very active website that lists all of the events. Civil War muster's coming up in August, and so that's part of what the Historical Society is looking to promote too.
Has there been anything in Jackson's history that surprised you since you've been immersed in it, by being a board member?
Surprised me? No, not necessarily. Piqued my curiosity, yes. You know, I'll find something out, and then next thing I know, I'm down in the library in the Minter Van Orman room trying to figure out, wow, where'd this come from? So.
Well, I know you'd like to have a nice group of people as you unveil the markers this Saturday. What time? And
It's 1 o'clock this Saturday,
Yeah.
and the address of the train depot, I think, is 501 East Michigan Avenue. But you can't miss it, obviously. And we hope to have a good crowd there. I mean, it's interesting to see. And there's many people in this community that have probably never been in the train station or in that depot. And it
Yeah.
is really a beautiful structure.
Well, thanks to you and everyone on the society for all the work you guys are doing. I appreciate it, and I know it adds to the community.
Well, thank you, Bart, for having us. And like I said, I'm so glad that we're able to promote this activity Saturday. Hopefully we'll have a good turnout.
We'll see you then.
All right. Thanks, Bart.
Thanks, Tony. Tony Shaughnessy, a board member of the Jackson County, Michigan Historical Society. Next